Good morning, everybody. I know it's the last day and we tend to slow down a bit and we've got lots of people to visit with, but it is a little bit past starting time and I'm a stickler for punctuality. I am Janet McVitie. I am faculty with the Sustainability Education Research Institute and in the Department of Educational Foundations, and I'm here to do a little bit of the emceeing here. I'd like to begin with today is that colonial day, Mother's Day, that divides the world into two kinds of people, mums and dads and so on. And I'd just like to say that I think every day we should honor all our relations. And that's what this conference is about. So from there, I'd like to just move into the Land Acknowledgement, which is much the same thing. It is about honoring all our relations all the time. And so I'd like to first acknowledge the land that is our first teacher and that nourishes us. I would like to honor the people who have been here from time immemorial, who are the original keepers of this land, and acknowledge that Treaty 6 gave us the right, us settlers, the rights to share this land, and that we are guests on this land, and we must always honor our hosts. So my role right now is to thank all our Red Hawk donors, Horizon, Eco-Friendly Saskatchewan, the Regina Public Interest Research Group, Kind Bars, and Hot Yoga on 20th Street. So thank you to our Red Hawk donors. And I'd like to introduce you all to Margaret Asmus. Margaret and I have known each other for about 15 years. And when I first met her, and I thought, well, who is this person? And then I looked at her CV and I thought, oh my gosh, how come I didn't know her? She's been working in sustainability for her whole life, probably, and not your whole life, but most of it. Was very involved with the Saskatchewan Environmental Society, worked here at the university in our Office of Sustainable Development as our Office of Sustainability, yeah, as our sustainability person. I was so proud of our university when we had Margaret here. And she works in community development with a number of different communities in Saskatchewan. And Margaret, thank you very much.
Thanks, Janet. So I'm here to introduce our keynote speaker, Laurie Adkin. I discovered yesterday, we didn't know each other previously, so we had to have a little bit of a chat. And Laurie actually spent a good part of her youth in Saskatoon. She was in Saskatoon between 1965 and 1980 and did her undergraduate studies in economics here at the University of Saskatchewan. So welcome back home. After that, she went to Queen's University to do her graduate studies and now is a political economist and political sociologist in the Department of Political Science at the University of Alberta, where she teaches comparative politics, Canadian politics, gender studies, and environmental studies, including environmental policies and movements. In reviewing her CV, one of the things that really stuck out was that she's been engaging with this topic of sustainable development for a long time, way before it was in mode. And so, for example, in 1998, she wrote a book called Politics of Sustainable Development, Citizens, Unions, and the Corporations. In 2009, she wrote a book called Environmental Conflict and Democracy in Canada, which looked at the ways in which democracy must be extended to achieve a socially just, ecologically sustainable society. In recent years, Dr. Adkin has been studying the political economy of climate change policy in Alberta and Canada, as well as the role of provincial consultation processes in informing and legitimizing policy directions, and has produced a number of publications in regard to this. She recently completed a multi-year study of government innovation policy and funding in Alberta universities and how they relate to the societal transition to a post-carbon future. Entitled Knowledge for an Ecologically Sustainable Future, Innovation Policy and Alberta Universities, it's only one of a number of publications that is looking at the whole problematic issue of universities' innovation policy and petropolitics. We had the chance to talk yesterday a little bit, and my first impression, we only talked for about 15, 20 minutes, my first impression was that she's very friendly, passionate, and smart, and I'm told she's been an activist since she was 14 years old. And even now, she says that she's an activist in academics clothing, which has sometimes caused some tension with her university. But my sense is that this isn't going to stop her because what she's doing is more important to her. I'm really looking forward to this topic, or to your talk. As Janet said, I was at the University of Saskatchewan for 15 years, and so I sort of have my own thoughts about the role, the opportunities and challenges that exist in universities and in post-secondary institutions around the whole climate crisis. So I'm very much looking forward to your talk. Thank you.
Move it back. Thanks. Well, good morning. Thank you all for being here. I want to also thank the conference organizers for doing such a splendid job of organizing absolutely everything. And I want to thank Margaret for the introduction, taking the time to get to know me a bit, and Emily Eaton for apparently being the person who suggested I be invited. It was very kind of her, and I'm very, very pleased to be here. And also want to thank Karen McIver for being patient with me with all my emails back and forth about everything. She's very, very patient and very kind. Okay, so I'm going to be presenting to you a few things. This is the first opportunity I've had to present any of the research from this study that took, as Margaret said, about 5 years to complete with the help of a number of research assistants. But I want to talk more generally, too, about the situation of universities with regard to post-carbon transition and the role they should be playing, and the roles that they are not playing. So as scientists and Indigenous elders have been telling us for decades now, life on our planet, as it has evolved over millions of years, is on the brink of a precipice. And this is what, in fact, brings us all here. Planetary ecosystems are threatened with collapse by the pressures of humans' appropriation of nature and their production of waste, pollutants, and greenhouse gases. It's urgent that we make a rapid transition from economies based on fossil fuels and ever-growing consumption to zero net carbon, steady-state economies, to economies that leave room for thriving biodiversity and make possible cultural diversity and secure meaningful lives for Earth's inhabitants. If ever there were a time for universities to assume a leadership role in providing the knowledge needed for societal, ecological, economic, and cultural change, this is surely that moment. To make the transition to an ecologically sustainable society, universities and colleges must educate new generations who have a solid grasp of the complexities of such a transition and the possible paths forward. The solutions lie not only in technologies or in the infrastructures needed to scale these up quickly, but in institutional and cultural changes. All sectors of the university have roles to play in creating and sharing their knowledges of economic, social, political, cultural, as well as technical reforms and innovation that will lay the foundation for a good life in an ecologically sustainable society. So we need to bring to bear all our diverse knowledges and experiences to make this shift. And we need to do it quickly. These are the possibilities that give hope and inspiration to our young people and that many university researchers are committed to realizing. And so we should ask what roles these post-secondary education institutions and the research and innovation funding systems are playing regarding the production of the knowledge and the formation of the citizens that are needed to create a sustainable future. As evidence of the need to transition away from a fossil-fueled economy has become irrefutable, in what areas of knowledge production have governments been investing? How have governmental priorities shaped the kinds of knowledge produced by universities? What are the implications of these investment choices for the resources now available to us to make the transition to a carbon neutral economy? And I'm sure, as you realize, there's a lag effect here. It takes some time to structure curriculum programs, train people, and so on. And so the question of resources is always determined somewhere in the past. What we have now is determined by the decisions we've made in the preceding years. So universities have great potential to provide the ethical leadership and the diverse forms of knowledge needed to help our societies make this transition, to exercise environmental citizenship. While some universities are moving in this direction, supporting strong interdisciplinary sustainability programs, institutes, or faculties, most are not. This is because university research and teaching are structured to serve the interests of the political economies in which they are embedded. The existing political economies, rather than the political economies that science and principles of social justice tell us that we must work toward. Publicly funded post-secondary institutions are in substantial ways policy takers. They're subject to the ideologies and development priorities of governments. Governments, in turn, typically set research and technology development as well as education goals in accordance with interests of the economic actors that have the greatest structural power and political influence, or that fit with the dominant ideas about niches for competition in the global economy. When there's little light between governmental vision and corporate interest, as is the case in neoliberal regimes, the public good mandate of the university is squeezed from every side. This happens through processes that scholars examine under the label of corporatization of universities. And as people in this field, I'm sure you have all encountered this literature and are familiar with the outline of it. So these processes include the points that I have up on the slide. I won't spend a lot of time talking about the corporatization literature, but there's a number of elements here that I think will be familiar to you, having to do with the way that university research and teaching priorities are continually reformed and aligned in relation to the priorities of market actors and so on. A number of studies have identified negative consequences for public health of a too close relationship between university scientists and private corporations. So we've seen a number of publications dealing with these problems in the areas of medical research, pharmaceuticals, agrochemicals, but very few studies touch on the consequences of research funding priorities for universities' production of knowledge that is critical to ecological transition. We could include under this category of knowledge that is important to advancing ecological transition, all of these things that I have up on this slide, plus a number of others that I'm sure you could add. So these are the kinds of things that I'm pointing to in regard to what types of innovation we would be hoping to find being carried out in universities and developing the skills of our students to do. So I am not going through some of these things in detail because I really want to leave some time for discussion at the end. So this has been the focus of my research for the past 5 years. I've been asking what kinds of research are being prioritized and how these relate to the urgent needs for post-carbon transition, biodiversity protection, decolonization, and global social justice. Now, I call this the political ecology of knowledge production. Beyond documenting what is being funded, however, we need to ask what drives these funding priorities. Priorities that in turn direct research and teaching carried out within universities, and what prevents universities from fulfilling their environmental citizenship and leadership roles. These research experiences, or these research questions, Freudian slip, grew out of my own experiences as a political ecologist working at the University of Alberta since 1991. Some of you may know that I co-authored and edited a book that was published in 2016 looking at Alberta as a petrostate, and it was called the First World Petropolitics. So here's a list of some of those experiences. During this time, efforts I was involved in to secure university support for a number of initiatives, they're listed here. So there was the Environmental Studies and Research Center, which is now defunct, an interdisciplinary BA in Environmental Studies, for which we never received support to hire anyone, a leading role for the university in interdisciplinary water research, a Campus Alberta Innovation Program chair in food security, and a signature area of research and teaching in ecological and social sustainability. All of these initiatives were unsuccessful. I actually mentioned I was offered an award for contributions to sustainability at the university last month, and in my little speech I said, well, I haven't been very successful. Everything I've tried to do in 30 years has failed, but thanks anyway. I think that's online somewhere, so you can enjoy that. So at the same time, we've witnessed the exponential expansion of the Faculty of Engineering, along with massive public funding for oil sands-centered research, institutes, chairs, and various initiatives. So I thought I would show you this because these are some slides that were prepared by the former Dean of Engineering at the University of Alberta, who's no longer the Dean, but he was the Dean for about 20 years. I used to refer to it as his kingdom. And he actually prepared these slides for a talk he was giving and left them online on internet for me to find. So this is his picture of what the university was doing in relation to the oil sands in 1995. So he's looking at, who's doing what, individuals. Some of the things are highlighted in different colors stand in for chairs or research centers. Right? So the green things are priority areas. And then he wanted to show everyone how much research in this area has grown under his tenure as dean. And so this was his slide of the oil sands research at the university in 2010. And I just thought, well, he's just done this job for me because there's no way I can represent this better. But this only takes you to 2010. So my research actually goes up to 2017, and since then there has been even further growth. So although a large literature has been produced, as I mentioned, on the corporatization of universities, surprisingly little has been published about the influence of fossil capitalist interest on the functioning of universities in carbon-extractive political economies. But universities that are situated at the extractive nodal points of fossil capitalist networks are expected to perform functions that correspond to specific industry needs. So while my focus will be Alberta universities, I hope at some point I will hear from you about your experiences here in Saskatchewan, where similar processes have started to unfold. So Petro universities act as training centers for graduates who go to work in the fossil fuel companies. They greenwash the industry by awarding honorary doctorates to senior executives from the fossil fuel companies, accepting their donations to sustainability initiatives, naming facilities in their honor, and collaborating in high-profile research consortia. Names on buildings are the most visible signs of industry influence within the universities. Visible roles for the university and university governments take the forms of the appointments of corporate executives to university boards of governors, senates or chancellorships. Direct influence is exercised by corporate representation on the management boards of centers and research consortia. And I could talk about some examples of those, but I think that there won't be time, so I'll not do that at the moment. But these relationships with private sector actors and universities are important to understanding the direction of educational and research priorities, and all of these relationships have been observed in Alberta's post-secondary education institutions. However, other aspects of the fossil fuel industry's shaping of knowledge production have received little attention. An equally, if not more important means of influence is the determination of government research funding priorities. In this area, influence is less visible or more indirect. It is mediated by governments through their innovation discourses and their funding decisions. Governments, corporations, and university administrators collaborate in constructing the public interest in ways that conform to the short and medium-term interest of the fossil fuel industry. This collaboration is facilitated by these actors' close and frequent interactions and employment mobility within industry, government, university networks, and within funding agencies themselves. Some of them are structured so that there are business representatives on the boards that decide what the priorities of the funding institutions will be. So the research I've been doing shines a spotlight on innovation policy as a pillar of a hegemonic political discourse about sustainable development. This pillar is a Promethean faith in technology, and it is twinned with a market-driven approach to environmental regulation. We are repeatedly told by politicians, corporate leaders, and university administrators that global ecological crises, or what they typically like to refer to as challenges. You always, when you see the word challenge, just substitute crisis and you'll be closer. That these crises can be resolved or dissolved through the magic of technological innovation. It's a claim that hands power over to experts such as engineers, scientists, and economists, and privileges these disciplines within the institutions of higher education. The sustainable development discourse aims to reassure citizens that governments and experts have environmental problems in hand, that there is no need to change the ways in which we consume or work or conceptualize well-being or distribute wealth or make collective decisions about the future of our society. This view of the knowledge needed for sustainable development has undermined a holistic, universal approach to knowledge production, including curriculum and program design that values multidisciplinarity. The innovation agenda instead pushes universities toward an apartheid approach that segregates the STEM fields from the social sciences, humanities, and fine arts. And it is worth noting that the agencies that promote the innovation agenda are the ones that dispense the lion's share of research funding. So the much larger pool of funding available for natural sciences and engineering disciplines as compared to the social sciences and humanities privileges technical knowledge that is largely disconnected from social, political, and cultural knowledge. The sectors of the university that can attract innovation funding are rewarded with more internal support and recognition and come to define the university's profile. The sectors that cannot attract such funding or related private endowments are increasingly left to absorb the effects of shrinking revenue. Social and cultural knowledge have been marginalized within and by the dominant innovation discourse. But what is more, we find ourselves in the absurd situation of having some sectors of the university actively advancing the extractive economy, while university leadership promotes truth and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples and undertakes initiatives to decolonize the curriculum. External pressures and incentives restructure universities internally. The resulting changes in stratification and power relations within the university have important consequences for how and by whom the university's mission is defined and its capacity to serve the public good. Alberta's major research universities have not taken a leadership role in producing the knowledge needed to advance our transition to a post-carbon, ecologically sustainable economy. Actually, post-carbon is a word that one uses at one's own risk in the University of Alberta. While a handful of other universities in Canada and elsewhere have begun to play important roles in leading sustainable development initiatives, Alberta's major universities have missed out on opportunities to do so and are, in fact, obstructed by the extractive industry interests that have become entrenched within state innovation industries and the universities themselves, state innovation agencies and the universities themselves. Okay. My research over the past 5 years reconstructed the priorities of Alberta's leading research universities in relation to energy and environmental knowledge production and technology development. The importance attached to different types of research was measured in multiple ways, including the numbers of researchers working on these areas, the amounts of provincial and federal government research funding they received, the establishment of research chairs, centers, networks, corporate endowments, and by analyzing the discourse of senior university administrators, corporate executives, and government policymakers. The funding sources whose project data we were able to code included the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, NSERC, Canada Foundation for Innovation, and the Alberta Government Science and Research Investments Program. We also gathered what data we could on funding from federal and provincial innovation agencies and from the private sector. We looked at the trends over a period of 15 to 20 years. We wanted to see what had changed over the whole period of the expansion of investment in the oil sands. A summary of this research will soon be available in the fall in the form of a Parkland Institute report. But here's some highlights. Starting with the NSERC-funded research at the Universities of Alberta and Calgary. 76% of researchers who received NSERC funding for energy-related projects were working on fossil fuel-related technologies. Only 15% were working on renewable energies, biofuels, or energy efficiency and conservation projects. A growing number of researchers in environmental sciences are also working on projects related to fossil fuels because this is where the funding is, right? That is, they're working in some area of environmental remediation related to fossil fuel extraction activities. So they're drawing in sectors of the university from sciences, agriculture, life, and environmental sciences who work in areas of remediation. In this slide, you can see the change over time. So the inner circle is the 1999 to 2000 snapshot, and then the larger yellow line is the most recent period, the 2015 to 2016. So this is a way of mapping the data that shows the change over time, the shifting of where researchers are going, what kind of work they're doing. And you can see that while in the early period, it's weighted more towards general kinds of environmental science and ecosystem research, that over time, there's been a shift of researchers in the direction of fossil fuel related, what we call the REM, the remediation areas related to fossil fuel technologies. Okay, environmental researchers working on some aspect of climate change declined from 20 researchers in 1999-2000 to 16 researchers in 2015. Over the entire time period from 1999 to 2016, only one NSERC-funded project satisfied our criteria for sustainable agriculture. In a province in which sustainable food production may become a key foundation of a future low-carbon economy, and water management issues have been identified in relation to regional effects of climate change, the absence of research in this area, at least as funded by NSERC, we also discovered as funded by other bodies as well, is very worrying. Taking a snapshot of the distribution of researchers by research category in 2015-2016, we found 187 NSERC-funded researchers at the two universities engaged in fossil fuel-related research and development, compared to 19 engaged in sustainable agriculture, sustainable forestry, waste management, municipal water treatment, or water conservation research. 67%, I'll soon be done with some of these figures. This is a 70-page single-spaced report with a ton of data in it, so I'm just giving you a few little pieces of what we found here. But 67% of all NSERC funding for energy-related research over the 15-year period went to fossil fuels-related projects. If we add funding for fossil fuels-related environmental remediation projects, like looking at how to deal with the tailings ponds or reclaim land affected by the oil sands, then fossil fuel-related research captured 84% of NSERC funding to energy research over this 20-year period, almost 20-year period. Okay, turning to the Canada Foundation for Innovation. And I'm very brief here in representing what we looked at, but of the 833 projects that were funded at the universities of Alberta, Calgary, and Lethbridge from 1997 to 2017, only 8 fell into the sustainable development category. Together, these accounted for 2.7% of CFI spending. Notably, innovation funding has also disproportionately rewarded research conducted by men. Male researchers received 86% of CFI funding from 1998 to 2009. That was another study done by another group of researchers and hasn't been updated since 2009, which is not surprising given the areas to which the funding is going. Right? Okay. The Alberta Science and Research Investments Program began funding university research in 1997-1998. Using its annual reports, we coded all the projects it had funded as of 2015. We found that environmental science research received about half as much funding as energy-related research. Funding for environmental science research has fallen by more than half since 2009. Energy-related funding, in contrast, tripled. We found that, again, the single largest recipient of energy-related funding was fossil fuel extraction, 56%, followed by greenhouse gas mitigation and other environmental remediation in the fossil fuel sector, including carbon capture and storage. Only 2 projects met our criteria for sustainable agriculture. Funding for agriculture-related research fell over the 20-year period to almost nothing. Wherever we looked, the creation of research centers or institutes, the establishment of research chairs, the funding of research consortia, we found funding to be heavily oriented towards fossil fuels-related research, often in partnership with the industry's associations or corporations. Even today, in the midst of an existential global ecological crisis, there is no major sustainable development research initiative, center, or institute at either of Alberta's leading research universities with a mandate to advance post-carbon transition. I have, sadly, come to the conclusion that for the University of Alberta, at least, the creation of such a center or area of global excellence is antithetical to the university's existing commitments to prolonging fossil fuels extraction. We witnessed the backlash from the deans of engineering and business to criticism of the oil and gas industry's role in climate change when Dr. David Suzuki, was offered an honorary doctorate for the University of Alberta last spring. Oh, I forgot I had an ASRIP slide in there. Sorry, that was the one that shows you how the funding for agriculture has shrunk. There's a gray area from the beginning, 61%, to the recent period where it's just about disappeared, and energy funding has increased. It's quite a striking change over time. Okay, sorry. So back to David Suzuki. While the deans of engineering and business publicly condemned the honorary doctorate, faculty and students from other parts of the university viewed the decision as a rare acknowledgement of the importance of critical environmental perspectives. They organized an open letter supporting the award and defending academic freedom against the campaign to bend the university to the will of the oil and gas industry. Now, such conflicts go to the heart of the question of the university's fundamental purposes and obligations. But it must be emphasized that these conflicts are not reducible to the political views of individual deans or university presidents, nor to differences of values between, for example, engineers and cultural theorists. There are, of course, differences. These differences are themselves the product of the segregation of knowledges that I refer to as the apartheid university. But the trenches of these conflicts are dug and maintained by the interests and ideologies that governments make central in the mandates of the innovation institutions. The power of market actors and institutional incentive structures is never absolute. Universities also have traditions rooted in democratic and humanist values. Some sectors of the university continue to defend strongly the ideals of university autonomy, of a community of scholars who grow in knowledge when their knowledge is shared, and of the production of knowledge for the public good. And as we also see in the case of the Suzuki honorary doctorate, actors can and do push back against the external pressures exerted by the political economy of fossil capitalism on programs of research, on teaching curricula, institutional citizenship of the university, and academic freedom. There is room for maneuver regarding the setting of research priorities and program design, but it requires vocal, principled leadership on the part of academics and administrators. University leaders can choose to follow the money, trying to position their institutions to profit from the latest shift in government funding direction, or they can try to mobilize public and political support for an independent vision generated from the bottom up through consultation with academics, students, and our surrounding communities about how the university can best serve the public interest. How the university can meaningfully contribute to decolonization is a key question that should be included in this consultation. In a country whose governments and university leaders have committed their institutions to processes of truth and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, and to respecting the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, including adherence to the principles of free, prior, and informed consent to development projects affecting traditional territories. The conflict between the worldviews of the dominant innovation ideology and Indigenous cultures must be confronted. Universities are called upon not only to be environmental citizens, but to be participants in decolonization. And this means opening all of our disciplines to self-reflection, about the implications of our teaching and research commitments for settler Indigenous relations. Lastly, and thank you for staying awake this long. I'm going to do the Greta Thunberg thing and say, is my mic on? Are you listening? Do you hear me? Okay. Lastly, the interests and ideologies that structure knowledge production within the universities serve either to widen or constrict the vision and life ways of our young people. If we are not providing an educational experience that introduces students to multiple ways of seeing problems, like ecologically and socially sustainable development, but we are instead competing to recruit them into specialized fields that communicate very little with one another, then we are not serving them well as citizens who will be called upon to shape and who will be living with the consequences of the future we're building today. Funding agencies and university administrators should be encouraging the building of interdisciplinary bridges and adopting a holistic understanding of innovation that includes social, cultural, and political knowledge and Indigenous knowledge, as well as technological knowledge. We would then be better positioned to provide leadership for our society's urgently needed transition to a just and ecologically sustainable future. The question for those of us who share this understanding of the university's mission is, how do we make it happen? So I'm going to stop with that, and I hope I have left a bit of time for some discussion, questions, and I'm going to say, we started, 10 minutes late, so I get 10 more minutes.
So I'm told by Marcia that we have time for a couple of questions. So any takers? Roger.
So from a political theory perspective, Machiavelli talked about how in times of crisis, organizations get dragged back to their original accountabilities and the good purposes that started them, which I always found surprising for Machiavelli to say something like that. But in any case, you hinted at the various functions of the university that offer up forms of resistance as it gets pulled back to its scholarly accountabilities. Could you give some more examples? Well, for example, you even being given an award, right? I mean, what are the structures of resistance that you see related to the pulling back of the university to its true accountabilities of public service? Because I think I find that the most interesting.
Well, there's a constant tension there because universities are making all kinds of claims and trying to position themselves as, sustainable in various ways. And so when one interrogates, what does sustainable mean for a university? Where does that stop? And in most cases, it's focused, their activities are focused on operations and facilities, right? Trying to make reduce the university's carbon footprint, find ways of reducing waste. This is good for universities too because it reduces cost, right? It reduces energy costs and so on. But when you get into other areas like, how is the budget allocated? What kind of research and teaching is being supported? Where's the university invested? Those questions tend to be a little too touchy, right? Tread on too many toes. So that's where that discussion usually stops. There's been a huge push at the University of Alberta, which I support, to recruit and hire more Indigenous scholars and students, and to review our curriculum, to indigenize the curriculum. But, at the same time, as I was trying to point out, you have this massive contradictions where you have one part of the campus which is actively, supporting and developing the extractive economy, and at the same time, it offers some portions of its budgets to projects in Indigenous communities and turns around and says, look at us. We are committed to helping Indigenous communities. Well, we're kind of like massively destroying the whole northern part of the province, and everything downstream of the oil sands so that people can no longer fish, or there's no game, and they have to fly 2 hours north to collect berries, right? And so these are the kinds of contradictions that the universities are not really facing. And I think part of this is driven by, it's fairly simple that universities are like this big ship. I sort of see it like a big ship, and it turns in the direction of the wind, right? And if the funding is coming, if the government is defining funding priorities, national strategic priorities in a certain way, and funding those, universities turn that way to catch the wind. To get that, they compete for a share of that, right? So the problem isn't just within universities, it's also what shapes these funding priorities at a governmental level. But that means that the universities have a role in helping to shape those priorities. University administrators are part of that process. And, you know, so there's a question raised there. It comes back to questions of governance and democracy within the institution. How do we get them to listen to us instead of to the major economic actors outside? Right?
You have another question over there?
It's not a question, it's just a comment. If you're in a ship that's sailing and you turn into the wind, your sails will luff. They'll flop.
Okay.
You won't go anywhere.
Any other questions or comments?
God, I have to come to Saskatchewan to learn that. Do you mean in terms of the funding envelopes from the agencies? Well, we looked at it from a different direction because it's a little tricky to figure out. Well, okay, let me put it this way. There has been a shift over time, I probably should have used that slide, where the programs of organizations like NSERC that are driven by they call it the discovery grants, right? Researcher-driven programs, their funding has been declining since 2009, and the government and industry-determined priorities, those programs have been rising significantly since 2009. So these are changes implemented under the Harper government, but continued under the Trudeau government. So that's one area where you see the amount of funding available, those envelopes have been restructured by governments, right? Academics also construct their research around where they can get funding, especially in the fields we looked at, right? And as I said, NSERC provides a lot more funding. There's a lot more funding available to people in the STEM fields from NSERC, CFI, ASRIP, and other sources than there are to people in the social sciences, humanities, and fine arts. So, yeah, it doesn't be, oh, I have to go. Sorry.
I have been given the signal that we have to wrap up so that we can move into the concurrent sessions. But I did want to thank you, Laurie. I found that really interesting, and it helped to kind of reframe some of the thoughts that I've had about post-secondary education and add another layer of complexity to it, which I don't know if that necessarily helps. So we'd like to thank you very much. Okay.